I'm going to be talking about thinking the unthinkables, which means, of course, you can't think about them. But that's exactly the challenge for government ministers, for civil servants, and also for corporate executives. And I'd like you, and that's why I've got a whiteboard there, I'm giving you notice now, think about the kind of things we should be thinking about. I have to say the horror of last night at London Bridge and what happened in Manchester is really not an unthinkable, it's unpalatable, but it's predictable, and MI5, the director Andrew Parker, has made clear that's coming down the track. I'm trying to think of things which are far more seismic and strategic, which are going to affect all your lives, whether you're young or old, and have a dramatic impact on the way you're thinking. So see this very much as engaging. Let me just ask, has anyone heard me speak before on this issue of thinking the unthinkable? One, my wife. That's a relief. Anyone else? Because I need to know that, because I will go back to certain principles of why I'm standing here. I am speaking, I decided 3 years ago to step aside from being a main anchor at the BBC simply for lifestyle reasons, but that was at the time that Putin invaded Crimea, seizing Crimea, a part of a sovereign nation. And it became very clear at the beginning of 2014 that something was happening. I didn't know where it was going, you didn't know where it was going, but what I'm going to share with you is really 3 years of work. I'm now a visiting professor at King's College and also spending part of them every month in Singapore at the National Nanyang Technological University. Just come back from Australia, North Africa, Bratislava, also Lisbon as well. In other words, what I'm sharing with you at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning with rain teeming down is something that I'm sharing with large numbers of people, often in small gatherings, often very discreet gatherings of very high-level people around the world who are pretty scared about what is happening, which is why my first slide is a red alert. It's red, even with this diffused light. It is a red alert. And I'd like you to feel you can challenge me at any time in the next hour and 10 minutes, and I'm happy to go a bit over 11 o'clock to take advantage of you being here. Share with me your experiences, share with me your fears, because actually there are probably a lot of other people out there who'd love to be in here, but are not sure whether they really want to talk about how worried they are. We're not sure where we're heading. There is now a struggle of how to respond. What I'm seeing at the highest levels, at chief executive, chairman level, at top civil servant level, not just in Britain but elsewhere, is a real sense of being scared by what is happening and the uncertainty. And remember, this is a project which I began 3 years ago. We are independently funded, we fund ourselves because we do not want to be hidebound and hostage to any other organization. What we're talking about is essentially human capacities, vulnerabilities and frailties. The ability of people you see at the top to handle the enormity of what is now happening. And it's all very easily said that you might assume you can point a finger of blame and say that person isn't doing their job properly. In their defense, I would say that things are changing so fast that it's really difficult to embrace the enormity of what is happening. What we're talking about as well, and all this comes from the people themselves at the highest level, is now existential threats to governments and to corporates if this isn't accepted as a very serious challenge. It's bad enough what you see happening around you, but much more is happening about the future of governments, of public service, and also the corporates as well, with shareholder value and so on. It is that serious. And if there are any of you who want to challenge me, please do. But one already.
Yeah, I wanted to challenge the red screen is saying now, I think in terms of our own society, yes, we have challenges, but looking at the global statistics, inequality is actually falling down on the global scale, with poverty in China and elsewhere really rising up a lot of people. Health-wise, we've never been in a better place globally in terms of access to healthcare and food.
Come back on me, because it's about the ability of those at the top to handle this for the reasons that I'm going to outline. But what I want to build forward is that series which Peter has introduced of reformations during this week. And I remind you what Stephen Fry said a week ago, talking about the greatest change to our way of living. Also, Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal, talking about new big challenges to governance. And I've just happened to pick those out for those of you who weren't there. to underscore the enormity of what is happening and what is already a theme here in the Reformation's series. My contention very strongly is that there are those out there who say it'll be over, we won't have a problem, but really you cannot wait. There's now a challenge to behaviour, culture and mindset right at the top. It's all very well talking about populism, nationalism and globalisation, but it's about the ability of those at the highest levels to embrace the enormity of change. And the overarching view of our research so far is that the conformity, which largely gets people to the top, is now disqualifying them in many ways from appreciating the enormity of change that needs to be first understood, then embraced. It's about changing that conformity. We're talking about the bell change, which is being prized apart in the middle, a hollowing out of much of what is happening. All assumptions about your capacities and your skills are now at stake. And what is fascinating, and we can't do it in an hour and 10 minutes, is that when I do this for 2.5 hours with very senior figures, after about an hour, they all begin to agree with each other. The peers talk to each other and say, yes, that's me too. And suddenly you get a consensus. But in the first hour, it's kind of difficult to make that kind of breakthrough. Conformity is no longer a career booster. It's now potentially a career killer. And I underscore as well the role of millennials in all of this. There is a completely different generation out there. You want to come in? There's a completely different generation who are thinking in very different ways. Please. One moment, Mike.
You say that conformity is no longer an option, but for those at the top. But it's like, well, Jeremy Corbyn spoke about how foreign wars and interventions are responsible for what we're experiencing now. He's vilified in the press, and most voters wouldn't agree with him, whereas like it seems that it's in the interest of those at the top to actually sort of maintain that as in them.
What I'm trying to do is get above individuals and talk and share with you the overarching framing of what we're seeing in Africa, in Asia, in Australia, in Latin America, and of course in the United States. So it's not about particular individuals. It's about, I'll give you the basis for our data in a moment, but what we're seeing here is a zigzagging which is going on of those who are trying to dodge what's happening when actually many of them have to be embracing what's happening. Now, the scale of the challenge, you may say, well, we can all cope with this. What is the scale of the challenge? One very senior figure who, and I'm afraid I can't divulge the kind of people we're talking to because they've talked to us on conditions of anonymity. It is like, as a leader, trying to eat an elephant in one mouthful. Because the enormity of the challenge now is so great, you're not sure if you start on one track whether you're going to resolve another track and another track and another track. It's his quote, but it's very indicative of the kind of reality that's out there with the enormity of what has to be done for change and transformation. The system is fundamentally disrupted. We must prepare ourselves. What if everything we assume is not enough? That came from a high net worth individual in an investment conference. In other words, you, the companies, have got to understand that we have a very different awareness of what is happening. There's even the IMF is talking about unleashing, their words, a global revolt by negative economic and political forces. The FT last year was talking about the international order of the last 70 years is fraying, maybe even breaking down. You may resent that. You may hope it's a blip that will go away. I would suggest to you this is not an assumption you can dare make in this new environment. So what I'm appealing for, and I'm going to come to you in a moment, thinking about unthinkables here, is a new awareness on this issue, a new flexibility on this issue, a new breadth, a new receptiveness as well, to modify what you do and how you do it at the top. Because keeping to that conformist way of going forward is simply no longer acceptable. Now, I have chaired 40, 30, 20 chairmen, chief executives, heads of government departments in various parts of the world, and behind closed doors, that's why I say many of them are frankly pretty scared about what is happening, because it's a challenge that's actually now intimidating and overwhelming. Challenge brimming with positives and opportunities, though, if you grip the enormity of what is now happening.